Good evening and happy Sunday to everybody. Um, yeah, the ticker was not clickbait. I don't end up paying much attention to somebody like Ibrahim X Kandi. Not somebody that's all that salient to me, but he did come across PVK's radar recently, and I wanted to know what was going on. And I looked up this little story about the dust up over at, I think it was Harvard, and some of the trouble that guy's having at managing some big think tank. Um, and then I found out how he got big in the first place. His book Stamped. Kendi's work has always courted acclaim and controversy in equal measure. Stamped, a more than 500-page doorstop that charts a conceptual history of American racism, published during the halcyon final years of the Obama presidency, has a provocative and even ingenious thesis. Racist ideas don't generate racist policies. Instead, racist policies, defined as policies that produce disparities, give birth to racist ideas to serve to explain those inequalities after the fact. And when I read that, I thought, oh my goodness, that's almost certainly correct. Um, that people would behave badly and then come up with a theory to cover their bad behavior is definitely how people behave. And that people behave well and then tell you later how they did it, even if it's not actually true, is also how people behave. And this actually, I drew a connection between that and what I've been learning in school. I'm taking online classes right now through the Catholic University of America uh, for canon law classes. And the class this semester is the history of canon law. And talks about how before there was legislation, before there was law written down, what there was a common custom, the tradition of the apostles, as it's commonly called. This common custom, people behaving, people doing these things first, which is where we actually get the term canon, canon, from. That's not a legal term originally, it just means a measure or a rule of something. Um, and so when the church finally got to writing things down, um, it started writing down what people were already doing and explaining it kind of after the fact. And it depends on what you're doing. If you're doing something good, then maybe you'll come up with a good explanation for that. But if you're doing evil, you're always going to come up with a bad explanation for that because that's happening. The development of racism in Western society probably began with just bringing over African slaves to work on sugar and tobacco plantations because that was a convenient policy. Um, and some of the racist ideas that followed American chattel slavery would have come afterwards to explain that. And so, anyway, just an interesting thing to note there. But that's all I've got on that. Hello, Chad.
Hey there.
How you doing?
Good. That was a well explained uh, little thing you did there. I
Well,
really
thank you.
appreciate it.
I'm used to preaching, so I know how to get ideas across quickly. Uh,
Yeah, no, that's good. It's good. Um, it kind of reminded me of how I like that you use the distinction between customs and then what would later become traditions. I guess that's kind of what I heard,
yeah, yeah.
or
You
one of the
start off
things
to,
I heard.
yeah, yeah. It's like a tradition is a custom that's been around long enough to really have proven its worth. But yeah, it's an interesting thing to notice that all of this church law just was the way that people were doing things initially, rather than Saint Peter sitting down with a grand plan on how all of this is going to go. Uh,
Yeah, that would be a nightmare.
you
Because
you can't plan that
because
much.
right, exactly. Yeah. So I remember I did ask you once long ago, like, so like, where did the the tradition of confession stuff happened, and you said it was complicated, and I imagine it kind of comes from some of that too, just some of the different traditional practices in general come from a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, and it's kind of changed its form
Yeah.
over time. Something like confession has. We didn't have the boxes until the 16th century, for instance, the confessionals. Before that, they had kind of public places where people know that this was going on and would keep their distance. And I think that's still the Orthodox practice, but I'm not sure because I'm not an Orthodox priest. So
Sure, that's kind of a practice we have in AA for like a fifth step, which is a type of uh, confession, I suppose, but with just a drunk, not a authority figure like such as yourself. I'm coming up on a weird spot where I will probably robot, but
yeah, I
So hey,
remember.
have you? Go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, I know a place on Highway 5 in North Dakota where you go down into a valley and you drop a call every time. So,
Yeah, every day on or every Sunday on this drive home. This is why I try not to call in because it does this thing here. Hey, have you read Benson at all?
yeah, Lord of the World. Mark,
Yeah.
not Lefebvre, Mark F. He's been reading that recently. I read it a couple of years ago, maybe even 4 years ago at this point. That was a really interesting book.
Yeah. I mean, I just did the prologue in like an hour into the audio version. I'm like, good grief.
Yeah, it's written in like
Just some parallels
1908.
there.
Yeah, 1908,
Right.
and talking about communism and one world order and all that stuff. Yeah, you'll
The
see how much he got right
university's
and how much he got wrong the farther
psychology.
you get into it. Yeah,
Yeah. Well, like the whole university thing and like the just
I think he's going. I
the
think we're
human.
losing him.
It's interesting.
Yeah, somebody else. Well, I'm sure we'll get Chad back here soon enough. But yeah, he's talking about Lord of the World by Robert Hugh Benson. That's a dystopian novel from 1908, which, it's just really, really interesting how he was able to see that. He was an Anglican convert to Catholicism and was pretty bullish on the whole Catholicism thing. So, if you're not in the mood for a little bit of a Roman triumphalist reading, you might not like it. But if that sounds like fun, yeah. So that's a very interesting book. Let's see if we got Mark coming in too. Mark in a hooded sweatshirt instead of a
It's
instead of
freezing.
it's freezing. What's freezing? Is it actually freezing?
Freezing. Well, it is for me. Yeah, if I weren't ill, I'd probably be fine. But
Oh, what'd
this
you get
time of
sick for?
year, I get cold, and my hands are getting cold. It's not good. It's not good.
Actually, the heat isn't it working in my room right now. So it means it gets down to 65 at night, which is basically perfect.
I was gonna say that's about sleeping weather. Yeah,
Yeah.
if you're not sick like me, I can't sleep at 65, but some people can,
Yeah.
and most people should.
Yeah. So I'll highlight this. It's a bad definition of racism. Fair enough. I didn't
Well,
say I agree with him on everything. I said I thought he had one good insight. Maybe that would have been a better way to. He had one good insight.
yes.
Policies come from ideas, but I think practice comes first, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, I was just fighting the rest of his bad ideas. Like,
Sure.
policy creates ideas. No, policy is created by ideas, and then it propagates those ideas. Fair, but that's not creation. That's propagation. Big difference. So yeah, I think that the right thing, and yeah, if you're going to give bad people, because I mean, he's a bad person. Like, there's no way around that. You can try to defend him if you want to redeem him or whatever, but he's really an irredeemable character.
Well, it
With
seems
that,
like from that article, he took a lot of money. Like he started getting paid a lot of money, and
he
whenever
stole it all
somebody's
too.
oh, he stole it too. Okay,
on lies, right? Like, he's not a good person. Like, there's
sure.
right, but I think when you're talking about people who aren't good people, it's fair to not give them too much credit and say, well, maybe they only got this one thing right. And like, I think that's actually really important, because people get confused. They say, oh, you said he got one thing right. Maybe he got two things right. No, there's a lot of people in the world who actually only ever got one thing right. I'm sorry, but it is. It is,
Yeah.
and it's important that we point that out, because otherwise people will try to redeem, and it's like, and that's actually been the topic this week is, and maybe you'll feel inclined to pipe in on this. What's the difference between forgiveness and redemption? Because I have a big problem with these two terms, and not only the terms, but I see a lot of people trying to redeem what I would call irredeemable characters who aren't even interested in redemption. And I don't think that's
Sure.
an appropriate thing to do.
Yeah. Well, so you'll like this, I think, Mark. You cannot receive absolution from a Catholic priest unless you have a purpose of amendment.
Yes.
It's just, and it doesn't even have to be a realistic prospect of amendment, right? Like, if you know you're pretty badly addicted to something and you think it's highly probable you're going to fall in the next month, but you would prefer that not be the case, that's enough. I can offer you absolution.
And does what's the difference between absolution, redemption, and then let's deal with, because for me, from my conception, forgiveness is something that I do for myself towards somebody else. And so for somebody to ask me for forgiveness is totally inappropriate. Like, first of all, no. Second of all, it's not forgiveness you're seeking. It's probably redemption, but I can't give you redemption. That's way above my pay grade. Sorry.
Well, forgiveness is forgiving.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about that, Mark.
Yeah, for me, it's something you do for yourself. Like, you go, okay, I'm going to forgive that person. And we were talking about this with Adam earlier too. And that allows me to not pay attention to my anger or resentment towards that person, but to have more time to focus on, we'll say, higher matters or something, right? Or at least not be locked up in too much negative attention paid in that direction, right? But that would mean, if I'm correct about this, that would mean that somebody else asking for your forgiveness is totally inappropriate and doesn't help them one little bit.
Sure. So I remember watching a video. This was some kind of documentary, and it was post-apartheid South Africa. And there was a guy who was involved with the government, and he did bad things to this family. I can't remember the full story. He goes to that family and he asks for forgiveness, and they like throw a plate at him. And I remembered like watching this, right? Because it had like the stinking camera pointed there. So how did you think this was going to end? And I was thinking, that's actually not like he could have used a little bit of coaching on that. That scenario could have gone badly. Could have gone better if he had said, what I did to you and your family was wrong. I shouldn't have done that. And I have a lot of sorrow and regret, and I wish I could go and take it back.
Is there anything I could do? Right.
Yeah, even if there's anything I could do, and you put that at the end. If he had said it that way, I think that whole scenario would have gone better. So I
Right.
think there's a little bit of something like you don't, and this is actually the form of Catholic confession. Is what you do is you just go in there and accuse yourself of sins and say that I'm sorry for them. And I
Right.
actually have to stand in the place of the judge to see if I'm going to give you absolution or not. I am, basically, right? Like, you would have to somehow get into the box and confess your sins and then convince me that you're not sorry for them in order for me to actually deny absolution. There's those guys that go their entire priesthood, they never deny absolution to anybody, and they're doing just fine because by the time they actually get to confessing, they're usually ready for it.
Right. Yeah.
So-
That barrier to entry is sufficient notice that they're serious enough about it that
Yeah.
they at
I
least
heard-
deserve a chance.
I heard a story once of a teenager going in there because his parents made him and he refused to cooperate.
Well-
Okay, you obviously don't want absolution, so I'm not going to give it to you. Yeah. So I think there's you're kind of on to something. Is that what I'll say this is that you don't owe forgiveness to them. That's the entire point.
Right.
That it's a mercy, that it's goes beyond justice.
But I don't think, like, if you transgress against me, okay, and then let's say a totally appropriate thing happens. Somebody else comes to me, and because this is actually the scenario that Adam was in, somebody else says, "Boy, you're still pretty upset about that. You need to forgive him," and I forgive you. That doesn't help you at all. Like, it still only helps me.
Right,
like,
right.
So again, it's not external to me. And I think because we've flattened the world or compressed, reduced everything, we're not understanding there's absolution, redemption, salvation, forgiveness, right? Like, all these things, they are related in some way, right? But they're not the same, right? And the differentiations are important because what I see and what we've been talking about actually for a couple of weeks now, but especially this week, is a lot of people are trying to redeem other people. And now the big problem is now you're seeing that all over the place with the most recent incident in Israel, right, with Hamas and all that. And it's already started. Like, there's already people trying to redeem and let me be clear, it's irredeemable behavior, okay? And you, if it could be redeemed, are not the one that's going to be able to do it.
Right.
Stop making excuses for people who are not sorry for what they're doing.
There's somebody else who could manage, but not you.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and so you can see there's a plethora of errors wrapped up in people's behavior. One is they think they can redeem. Two is they're trying. Like, wait, the arrogance, I tell you, right? And three is, why are you involving yourself in a procedure that somebody has to, like, actually recognize a wrong was done, have the intent at least to acknowledge that to the person they wronged or people they've wronged, and have an intent to do something about what they had done? That's three big ones. None of those are even on the table right now for say Hamas or a number of other things, right? There's a bunch of people out there who have done a bunch of things, and they have no intention of apologizing or even thinking they've done anything wrong, and they have their defenders. And I'm like, why are you defending this? They don't want your defense. Like, there's a bunch of people out there who say, well, so-and-so didn't lie. And I'm like, I don't know. They said they lied. I don't know why you're defending them against something they've admitted to. That seems weird. Stop. Like, why are you doing this? Oh, I can't hear you, Father Eric. Did you mute?
Forgot to yeah, I'm good. I'm good. I'm back. Definitely wasn't using air, the stupid computer. Something that we were told in seminary, and I think makes a lot of sense to me, is that you're always able to forgive somebody. That's always possible. but
Right.
it's not always possible to be reconciled with them if they've hurt you.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well,
That's a
and that's
huge
right.
distinction
Well,
right
that's
there.
right. And that's different. That's important, but a difference from what I'm talking about. Like my big thing for forgiveness is, yeah, I can forgive you all day long, but that's it's not going to change my attitude towards you if you're not repentant, for example. Like if you lie to me and then you want forgiveness for lying to me, maybe you've lied to me every time you've talked to me, right? Like I don't know, or every time in the past 5 years, or whatever, or every time about this particular subject. And I can forgive you for that all day long, but I'm not going to believe you the next time you talk. It doesn't help you at all. Like
Mhm.
it does nothing for the other person. It just helps me not to stay bitter uh, and angry at you. It's for me. It doesn't. It's not external to me. And what you're actually wanting is either absolution or some form of redemption or some forbearance on future behavior. And it's like, no, you did. That's inappropriate to ask for. If you're going to ask for it, I'm not the person to ask because that's well above my pay grade. And
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I think that we just don't have a sense of that anymore. Like we've just lost the idea that because no one's dealing, let's say, appropriately with the spiritual. Like some people are dealing with the spiritual by getting crystals, and, whatever. But that's not right. They've still flattened the hierarchy, and they're just switching sides on the two worlds mythology or whatever. Like that doesn't
Yeah.
help, right? You really have to have that sense of what all these things are, that they're different, why it's important, why you don't run around just apologizing for people who A, aren't sorry, and B, did a bad thing. Like
Now
why would you do that?
this term redemption's really interesting, right? Because it's like a business term.
Yeah.
It's like a business contractual term. So the idea is, I think, and I'm going to put this into a biblical framework because that's all I know, is that we sold ourselves to the evil one, to the Lord of this world, and by his blood, Jesus ransomed us from their power so that we wouldn't have to be enslaved to the evil principality of this world, but instead could now become slaves or even sons of God. Uh,
Mm.
and it's like, that's a pretty steep price to pay. Who can pay a ransom on their own life, much less somebody else's? So the
Right.
idea that you could go back and redeem somebody else on your own capacity, right? It's just that's a work of the Holy Spirit. That's not something that you're actually going to be able to manage.
Right. And I don't think people should be running around, I'm just not talking about, we'll say, the world issues. Like it scales all the way down, running around apologizing for other people. Like that's why I don't like the term Christian apologetics. I'm like, really? Like,
Well,
why would a
that
Christian
comes from a Greek
apologize?
term. The Greek for apologia is like a legal defense.
Right. I wouldn't mount a defense either. Just be like, here's me, here's what I do, deal with it. Like, I don't, why are you defend, like, you can let people attack the unassailable castle all day long, and I'm sad to see them die at the foot of the unassailable castle, but also like it's your choice. You wanted your free will. There you go. You're gonna die at the foot of the unassailable castle. Good luck to you, buddy. Have fun. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then
I
you
like
mentioned,
Laura's comment.
yeah, that is what Mark is like.
I am
Dying
so
at the
like
foot of the
that.
unassailable castle, or just not
Have
feeling
fun.
sad when somebody dies at the it's the not feeling sad when somebody's yeah.
Well, I do feel sad, but I'm not gonna cry that much over it. Like you made a choice. You were warned. Unassailable castle here. I don't know what to tell you.
And William Brandt says God's mercy doesn't mean much, if anything, if you are innocent, or if you're convinced that you're innocent already.
Yeah.
I
Well, and
always thought
I
in
wonder
2000.
too,
Sorry.
like how does this relate, in terms of our loss of the ability to deal with symbols and symbolism as such, like that loss of what I would call the poetic, right? Like, because I think the poetic is the thing that gives you the ability to differentiate a bunch of things that look the same on the surface, like redemption and forgiveness and, you know,
Reconciliation,
recon-
salvation.
salvation. Right. Thank you. Those are the other two words I was missing, of course. Great minds think alike. Um, I don't know why we think alike, but just in general, great minds think alike. Yeah, and because I think one of the things that Sally Joe's been wondering about is I don't know why she's not here, but she threatened to be. Was wondering about this whole loss of the appreciation for, like, what's the difference, say, between straight up voodoo, worshiping, going to the to the cathedral, to the basilica in Washington D.C. and seeing all these statues of Mary, right? Or worshiping these little painted pictures in the Orthodox Church, like, right? And what is the difference? Because I mean, we've got crystals and astrology, and
Are you asking me?
yeah. What, right? Because that is part of the issue, is the iconoclasm causes us to be in this situation where where we're not able to engage with the differentiation between the things that we just mentioned. Like, differentiation as such is really hard for people, right? They keep flattening things. You flatten things when you only have, we'll say, simple tools. And thinking about the world as linear and discrete is a very simple way to think about this. Very useful. Science is useful, absolutely. We're on computers, guys. Like, no one's throwing the wooden shoes into the machine here. But also, what did we lose with that? Like, what is that all about?
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to give you just kind of the Christian Catholic apologetics answer, which is Blessed Virgin Mary is the Mother of God. She's going to bring you to Jesus. If you're relating to her properly, it'll never be idolatry because she wouldn't want that. And now, being the Queen of Heaven, she's just going to make sure that these things taper. So basically, it's like, look, that's just false worship right there. The crystals and the
Right.
tarot cards and the magic, that's just all false. And the true worship is worship in spirit and truth, through Jesus, to the Father and the Holy Spirit, forever and ever. Amen. I don't know if I've got a better answer than that right now. Maybe I will next week.
No, that's fair. That's fair. Yeah, and I think that if you don't understand the need for the way to engage with things, we'll say indirectly, right? Because something like sola scriptura is very like, oh, it's pretty direct, man. It's A, B to C. It's not, and there's no mediating factors, right? You don't need any mediation at all. You've got the book mediation. That's all you need, which is crazy, by the way, but whatever.
It's not actually how it works.
Well, and I think that when you compress the world that way, you compress everything that way. Right now, you don't have an appreciation for other people's perspectives because you're not used to it in the spiritual realm. Like, you kind of lose that flavor. And it's a very tyrannical way to think of the world. It's like, well, it's me through the Bible, right up the ladder all the way to the top. And so who needs angels? Who needs icons? Who needs any of that stuff? And just like forego it. But there's a significance in approaching things through worship of their physical representation.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's so at least for certain Protestant denominations, they'll still do things like baptism and communion. But those things don't have any significance of themselves. they're pointing at something that God has already done. So
Mm.
certainly the Baptist notion of baptism is that you've had this experience of encountering God and regeneration, and getting the dunk and being baptized in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit is just the outward manifestation of that in the community. So obviously, you couldn't do that unless you were an adult and you were capable of having an experience of, misery, redemption, gratitude, and articulating to other people that you've gone through that. So obviously, they don't baptize infants. It doesn't
Right.
make any sense. Um,
Right.
the more traditional notion, and I mean Catholic and Orthodox, Lutherans, chime in the chat if you think that the sacraments are efficacious. Um, uh, um, yeah, we think that the symbols and the sacraments that we encounter actually cause what they signify, which is how we
Right.
get the Eucharist, right? Jesus says, "This is my body, give it up for you." And then we symbolically, sacramentally reenact that. And then Jesus's body is there
Mhm.
in the sign of bread. His blood is there in the sign of wine. So the sacraments actually, and this is what Aquinas says, it actually contains the grace that it gives you. Um,
Mm.
So, we could put that in with the big seven sacraments. But the sacramentals of the church, the little sacraments, they also contain the grace that they send you. The icon of Our Lady of Perpetual Help that I'm looking at right now contains like the whole story of Our Lady comforting the infant Jesus when he's notices the cross for the first time, and like that image contains that whole story for me, so it allows me to interface with it. So
Right. Well, I like William Branch's second comment. There's last comment there. Yeah. See, I think that's tied up in the poetic way of thinking, which is how I'm using poetics, by the way, is a way of thinking, right? There's two ways of thinking. One is linear and discrete, basically, right? Very concrete. And the other is more along the lines of what we would associate with poetry, which is indirect and multi-faceted in terms of there's multiple ways in and multiple ways out and multiple connections in the middle, right? Instead of just one connection on each end. And when the world is flat, when the world is reduced, compressed down to, like, say, you book creator, right? Then the problem you run into is that everything should be universal. Like, if that were the structure of the world, universalism is correct. I got news for you. That universalism is not correct. It's not. It's weird because it's like even the evolutionists are universalists. I'm like, evolution states universalism is incorrect. I don't like, where are you getting this from?
so
You're
so
denying your
what do you
own
mean by
religion.
universalism?
Well, universalism for me, universalism only applies to the ethereal. It doesn't apply to the material at all. That's how
Okay,
Plato conceived of it.
so I don't know how you're using the word universalism.
Well, look, if my child is sick and God intervenes and a miracle occurs and somebody else's child is sick and God doesn't intervene for them, they think it wasn't God. Okay. Whatever. Like, right? And they'll come up with alternate explanations,
I
right?
still don't know what you're talking about.
Well, because that would be universal. Like, oh, I'm as pious as they are, and therefore I should get the same gifts that they get.
Oh,
That
okay.
right,
So it's treating God like a vending machine.
right. Well, all universalism is treating God like a vending machine. Yeah,
Yeah.
ultimately, because
And
because
so
God as
and
creator would
so
be
are you
provider of all things. So
are you aware of how universalism gets used to being that all people end up redeemed in the end.
That's
Redeemed,
ethereal,
saved,
right?
reconciled, and forgiven.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, but when you're a materialist, you don't actually use it that way because you can't, because you're a materialist. And that's where the problem, right? They try to universalize the material, which is where it doesn't exist at all, obviously. Uh, it's like Einstein evolution, like all scientific frames, it doesn't work. And yet they persist in their, oh, well, this happened to you, so it should happen to me, or this person did X, Y, and Z, and so when I do X, Y, and Z, I should have what that person has. It's like what, and you kind of see this there's a horrible, well, there's an interesting video from a guy who does did Mac computer repair for 15 years, and he basically said, oh, my whole 15 years is worthless because my goal in doing my YouTube channel and all the stuff that I do with forums and everything else was to make sure that somebody who was a teenager in high school could build the business that I built. And nowadays you couldn't get into this industry no matter what you did. And so he felt like his entire 15 years was a failure. It's like, what? Right. He did a whole video on it. It's a horrible video. I mean, it's an interesting video because meaning crisis, but wow.
I think you're going to need to put a little more work into explaining what you mean by universalism, because I'm having a hard time tracking you here. But
it's universal material cause and effect.
Yeah. So just all causes are one-to-one and can be reproduced anywhere. So
Exactly.
It's basically like seeing the entire universe as a series of interchangeable parts.
Yes.
So it's like I can go get an air filter for 2019 Equinox, and it's going to be exactly the same as every other air filter. And then you try and map that onto,
and it's a
I
machine.
can start a business from my garage, and it's going to go just like Apple did.
Right. Or HP or right. Because I've got the formula that they used. And even if you do, and this is the problem. This is what this one guy, I think his name is Rossman, the last name. This is what he was talking about, was like, I'm trying to reproduce the things that made me successful. And maybe he is doing it perfectly, but the conditions, we live in the age of decay somehow. What is that? A bonus surprise. You don't mean to shock, right? Entropy is real. Like, I don't, where did you
never
not
step in the same river twice?
Yeah, exactly. I don't, and yet he thought that, well, he had based his whole like worth in the world of 15 years of work helping people on that. And yet, he thought that this was going to be something he could manifest again. Like lightning strikes rarely, right? Like, and sometimes that happens. Oh yeah, Michelle has a good statement there too.
Repeatability of observation and experiment is the basis of science, and that works for the least interesting parts of reality.
Exactly.
Well, the stuff that we can manipulate, the stuff that's beneath us.
Right.
Like if I heat water to about 212 degrees Fahrenheit, then it'll boil.
Woo! That's interesting, because maybe that's part of the problem with iconoclasm, that they think icons are only beneath you. But icon is the raising up of that which should be beneath you, ordering it such that it points above you.
Yeah, I think that's how they get confused. All right, let's see what Mitchell, crazy man's into. Or the right combination of words will lead to a proper outcome in the words that can be either nihilistic or narcissistic or none. None is my favorite. I'm having a hard time following what he's getting at there, but you're nodding. Explain it to me.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's magical words, and words can carry some weight when combined with proper practice, we'll say, which is not to say witchcraft is real, but it is to say that liturgy is. Like liturgy works, prayer works, right, when done correctly, right? So believing that it's, say, just the right combination of words, and that will manifest something repeatable and reliable. But then it becomes nihilistic or narcissistic, or leads to nothingness,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which
Yeah.
leads, I would say, leads to nihilism. But I think what he's really talking about there on the none is apathy, where people are just like, doesn't matter what I do or what I say, even though I think words are powerful, what I say doesn't have an effect, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And nope, it's gone. Whatever I was going to say went away.
That's
But
okay.
Bazzani was coming at the same place right at the same time, and he said, "Jinx, Mark, you got it in text, you got it in yeah. So
Yeah, through proper technique, through proper techne. Right.
technique,
It is
yeah.
a techne issue. It's like, okay, techne can do whatever in the world. And it's like, well, there's still a mediation that has to happen. And even if it's, say, proper techne, like if everybody puts everything in the right place and does all the prayers appropriately, and Catholics are very good at understanding this for some reason. They're like, sometimes there's a higher plan. That's usually what they say. Like, we tried to intervene, and sometimes there's just a higher plan, and it's God's will, and they just kind of give up. They don't dwell on the fact that, the Catholic thing that's supposed to work didn't work, because they never believed it definitely would to begin with. Catholics seem really good at that, actually, surprisingly.
Going in and blessing the person with the relics of Saint John Vianney will only heal them 30% of the time, or
Right.
0% of the time. I don't know.
Right.
Yeah. So it seems like even with words, like let's take something like apologizing for bad behavior.
Mm.
It's not actually about the words that you say.
Right.
It's about you actually being sorry, and you're going to communicate that whether you like it or not, regardless of the words that
Right.
you say.
Right.
And so
Right.
it's almost like all of these techniques, all of these propositions and procedures, if they don't have the spirit breathed into them, are only going to last for a time, maybe spasm around and then fall apart. But it's got to be like 100% oriented top to bottom in order to really work. Something like that.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Well, there's an interesting quote from the best science fiction show of all time, which is called Blake 7, where the main character, or one of the main characters, it's complicated, it's British, they're like that. I have never understood why it should be necessary to become irrational in order to prove that you care, or indeed, why it should be necessary to prove it at all. In other words, if you don't know someone cares, then it's likely they aren't doing things in the world that are, we'll say, observable by someone other than themselves. And therefore which is not to say that if you are doing things to care for somebody that they'll notice, but it is to say that maybe telling somebody that you care should never be necessary. Ever.
Yeah. Huh. Yeah, it's sort of like if you have to tell somebody that you're popular.
Right. It's the same sort of thing. That pattern's kind of everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah, well, once you say it, it's certainly not true. By the time the words have left your mouth. That's a thing. I did see something from Emma up here. No, here it is. So, Mark, you're coming to the Poetry as Perception Convivium, right?
I have no idea what any of those words mean. So
It's the conference in Arkansas.
yes, I know about the conference, but
Yeah.
I'm trying to get to Arkansas. I don't know if I'm going to be able to go there or not. we'll find out.
Okay, so it's up in the air right now, but I will be there, and the link to down below. It's oh goodness, calendar. Where are you at? It is November 17th and 18th in Arkansas. Tickets are available. You'll have me, Ted, and Dr. Jim. And yeah, if you saw the conversation we had, PVK released that on Monday. I had a blast just in the middle of that conversation, just talking to those guys. I felt, like a little like, man, these guys are pretty daggone smart, and I'm just keeping up. But yeah, it should be a good time. And I think Arkansas is probably nice in November. Not too hot.
Well,
Not
it
too
won't be
hot, Mark.
hot, not in
Yeah.
November, that's for sure. I don't know if it's nice. It sounds cold to me. It looks awfully northward from where I'm at, and I'm already a little chilly. So
Okay. Well,
I'm
last
gonna
year,
try to go. But yeah, that was a good talk. I like that talk, by the way. I thought that was a good chat. I'm glad that PVK released it finally.
oh, we only recorded that on Friday, and it was released on the Monday. So he let that out of the gate pretty quickly. Apparently, Laura's conversation is going to be behind the paywall because she doesn't want to deal with a whole lot of attention, which is fair.
That's too bad.
I'm just going to have to pirate it or something.
You're gonna have to find a friend. Do you have any friends?
I have two actually, and both of them were in that conversation. So
Fair. That's funny.
the difference between Jewish and Christian religion on this side and paganism is that we serve the deity versus the deities serving us. I sure hope so.
I don't know if that conception of paganism is correct. I mean, there's still, I think the way the pagans related to direct appeals is a little different. I think the primary, I really liked when Vanderklay a while back, it was probably at least a year ago, did the video on the economics of paganism just collapsing the Roman Empire because no one could buy the redemption. It's like, yeah, it's not a bad thesis. I don't know whose thesis that was, but he did a video on it. I was like, oh, it's pretty clever. I like that idea. Also not wrong.
Yeah, the bread, the wine, and the priest's salary is a lot cheaper.
Well, and only having one set, right? Because it's really all about how many sets of that extra layer of management do you have? It's like, oh wow, that's kind of tough.
Yeah, interesting.
Laura can't see her own video, apparently. My goodness.
Because I don't have $3.
What kind of a ridiculous capitalistic world do we live in? Consumeristic world do we live in when this is the case?
Don't you think it's weird that we can just watch things on YouTube for free?
Yeah, I know. Nobody finds the freedom of like free streaming from people.
And not only that, but I can just put YouTube isn't charging me a dime to put this out there. I've got to pay for StreamYard, and I'm happy to do it because it's a solid tool here. But
yeah.
Being able to just bring people on, like that's nice. But yeah.
Well, I did a Zoom call on Saturday. I couldn't do the whole thing because things going on, but did a Zoom call where I listened to a very high level, very academic. It was sort of like reminiscing there. It's been a while since I've been out of Boston and able to listen to really super academic stuff from DC Schindler. And I was like, wow. And it was free. It was totally free. Just pop in when you want, pop out when you want. I'm like, yeah, we don't even understand how privileged and ridiculous this is that something like this is free.
This is like a medieval peasant being able to listen to the lectures of Peter of Abelard, or Thomas Aquinas, or Albert the Great, or and just yeah.
No, it's so insane. I think there were like 20 people
back.
there.
Yeah.
Well, and then and then you can spread it out to everybody. And then the problem that people don't realize with that is that but that goes double for the bad ideas, of which there are many more. And so they just drown out the good ideas And so maybe having a hierarchical system and a broadcast system that was elitist was actually a good thing, because then you weren't flooded with information and then had to sort through it yourself, because you kind of do, or rely on algorithms to sort it for you, because you kind of do. You're not going to sort.
There's another option. You could sort through in the community. That's how I get all my news. I get all my news from Bridges of Meaning.
I pirate all of my sense making from other people who listen to garbage and then occasionally throw me the good stuff. Thank you very much, everybody. I used to do that for people too. And occasionally I spit things out for other people, but yeah, usually it's other people listening to the garbage, and I'm at the end of the filter. Thank you.
I have just enough bandwidth to follow a certain percentage of Catholic news.
Right.
And it's like, I've put the time in to figure out the players and the issues, and I can't do that with geopolitics, for Pete's sake. Tell me, are there any good guys? Are any of them good guys?
Well,
should I be putting? That's what I want to know. Are any of them good guys?
That's the problem now. Yeah, and I think we really get lost when we try to focus on the wrong thing. Like, set of badness is very large compared to set of goodness, and so the discernment you need is for the good, and then the other discernment is irrelevant. And so you don't need to worry about the rest of it. And I think the focus on things like beauty is going to save the world, or conversation, which is basically a subset of gnosis, by the way. See my tweets on Twitter about Age of Gnosis. Or truth is going to save the world, which is a subset of gnosis. I think that's all misguided, right? It's goodness that's going to save the world. The discernment you need is for the good, because there's goodness in ugly things, right? And there's goodness in falsity. And people don't like that. Oh, not one little bit. But
I don't like that. Goodness and falsity. Give me an example.
Well, in one way, we'll say the dog-headed are false, because they're not in the church, right? St. Christopher may be a saint, but did he go to church? Was he taking this out? Like, what?
No, he was ferrying people across the river.
Right, but in that way, he wasn't true to following Christ. But he was, pivotal in the Christ story.
Getting people across the river.
And then we can argue about what true means at that point, but you can see what I mean about, well, there's a falsity about him being a saint at all, because he's still dog-headed and he still didn't really follow. It was like, how did he get in the club? What's going on there? But he did, and it's important that he did, and it's important why. It's like, oh, there's a there. It's super important. It's not about living the true life even, right? But it's about being true to the higher principle. We'll say it's about doing the right thing, or it's about doing good in the world, is the way I'd cast it, right? And so, yeah, if you stick with the good, you're all set. You can throw the true and the beautiful out at some point. Not that I recommend that, but like, if you needed to pick one of the three, there's Ted. Ted can straighten this all out and tell me where I'm wrong. Excellent.
Yeah, the
oh my goodness, what are we talking?
Mark hasn't studied the transcendentals according to St. Thomas Aquinas, so he gets confused. He doesn't know that they're all just different aspects of being.
Yeah.
So being is good. Being is true. Beautiful, I'm kind of, depends on the day of the week. You can get me to say that beauty's a transcendental, and other times I'm just like, I still don't see it.
No,
I think it might just be a property of material beings, but I could be persuaded.
I made a radical claim, Ted. I made the claim that effectively, and I used St. Christopher to do it, but effectively, goodness is sufficient, and you don't even have to be true. Like, you can be false and good, and that is a way to be, and it's okay.
Oh, well, I mean, Mark, what you're saying, like with the idea of like St. Christopher is like, what level of falsehood, right? Because because you can be messing up on the lower. obviously you can be messing up on like lower levels of, say, truth, but doing something that's true on a higher level, right? And so, I mean, this happens all the time. I think this is how mercy works, basically, is that God looks at us and he's like, in my mercy, I'm going to take the fact that like, you don't want me, but you might want to want me, or you might want to want me, or something like that. And then he starts pulling us in. And so in that sense, yeah, I mean, obviously, if you use falsehood in the broadest sense, like it would seem that many civilizations have had certain factual falsehoods that they've, in societies that they've operated under about, say, mechanics of the natural world. Totally fine. It doesn't make them, those people, morally evil. Actually, Mark,
Right.
what's interesting is that notion that you can only be good if there's no falsehood is part of the science is a nonsense, right? And yeah, right. I'm sure this is just what you're just wanting someone to bring this up. And so here, I'm your man. I'm your Patsy. I'll bring it in for you, Mark. Don't worry. I'm there for you.
I know.
So the thing, I mean, because, well, I'll just put it this way. If what you're saying isn't true, we're all screwed. But there are if you're aiming at something high enough, you can be, let's say you can get some of the details wrong. And what Father is saying, I completely agree with, is this notion that the transcendentals are like different things, right? Because what's weird is like people get this weird Platonic idea of, it's actually not even a real Platonic, it's like popularized Platonism, where there's like a room where there's like a goodness that's like a statue or an animal or something, and then there's like a room, there's another like statue or animal, and like that one's truth, and then over here there's being, and then over here there's unicity, and no one actually knows what unicity is, but that's fine. But it's like, and what the point is that it's the reason they're called transcendentals is not because they transcend everything. They're not like things that transcend other things, but they're aspects that are found at every level of reality.
And I
That's
think,
what
Mark,
makes it
I think I'm starting to get what you're saying, and it's like truth has multiple levels of participation. And if you stumble up on some of the lower levels, you're going to be fine, right? If you think the water's 40 degrees and it's actually 58, but you're like, that's too cold to swim in right now.
Yeah, well, and I think it's more, to some extent, fundamental than that. I mean, I think the first problem is truth. There's no such thing. I think what you mean is the true, and then that changes everything, right? 'Cause now it's not static anymore. Right now we're back into the poetic way of understanding something rather than the discrete linear way. And then it's because it is the true, it's the true, the beauty, and the good, right? But they're not discrete things in the world, right? They are unfolding aspects through time, which, and that's what you have to relate to, and you have to constantly re-relate to.
So
and that sort of understanding, like I've heard truth defined as the conformity of the mind to reality. And as long as you're clear about what kind of mind is doing that, we don't, right?
There we go.
Yeah.
Like it's this mind right here. We can conform to a little bit here and there with about 80% accuracy if we're lucky.
Yeah. But I want to, Mark, I want to shoot back because this is just something that I've been trying to get into this thick skull of mine. And there's a Dominican scholar who is saying this. When we say like being, that good is an aspect of being, we don't mean like that some being has a quality of goodness. So like being is good. So in as much as a thing exists, it is good, and in as much as a thing is good, it exists.
Mm-hmm.
You could spend 5 years on that one, right?
Yeah.
So you're like, how do you exist? Well, by being good, by goodness. Like that's how you participate in being, is goodness. It also means that for a thing to be is fundamentally good, which is, man, that's freeing, right? Because it actually gets you into a different place, a totally different place in the way that you relate to existence. And you don't think, what it says is something like, well, it says all sorts of crazy things that are really helpful. Like, for instance, no, you've never met someone that's just bad. In fact, you actually can't encounter something that's just bad, because in order for it to be a thing, it must in some way be participating in the good, have goodness, right? That's pretty radical, but it's also true. And I like Lewis makes this point. I mean, he's you know, again, he's was the conduit for so much of this stuff. It's like, he actually makes the point that the more evil a thing is, in terms of our experience of it, it actually requires a greater capacity for it has to have more, let's say, ontological goodness, right? A bad dog, his example is, a bad dog can do so much harm. A bad man can do much worse harm than a bad dog. A bad angel, like, all bets are off. And you start thinking about that, and you're like, yeah, that is so true. And then you think like someone who has all of like the worst people in history, in terms of what they've been given, they're extraordinary people, right? And I mean, that's both wonderful and a total warning, just because like, hey, just because someone has these great capacities does not mean that they're like doing what's right. But it also means that, well, what it means is that in the end, like, evil will just kill itself, because evil is an anti-pattern.
Well, that's what it
right?
is. Right. Evil is that.
It's an anti-pattern. It's not existence. Right. And that's when we say being is good. We don't mean it's just like, oh, it's good that those things exist. No, being is good.
Right. Well, or maybe a better way to say it is that there's always the possibility of goodness within something that is being, and therefore there's the possibility for redemption and all that.
It's not even because, look, when we talk about redemption, we're generally talking about like moral goodness, and I think the transcendentals, that term goodness is a much broader term there.
True.
Right. Goodness is the capacity to bestow perfection on another being, to complete it, to elevate it, which is why goodness is diffusive, and it calls out, and because beings naturally want to tend towards their perfection if they're not twisted like these beings here. And so the perfection of the rock is to be heavy and solid. And so it tends towards that place where it can be heaviest and most solidest, that being on the ground. And if you think that sounds fanciful, then, well, what is gravity exactly?
Checkmate.
You actually have an equation, which is cool, which is useful, but it doesn't actually tell me why that happens.
Yeah.
Separating ontological goodness, goodness as the capacity to bestow perfection, versus moral goodness, which is being aligned with God and justice and all of those things, behaving virtuously. Those are two different things. You got to keep them separate.
Mm-hmm. But you do. What is interesting is that you do see, and this is, no one's going to make a consequentialist of me, but I would say that you can actually see that as moral creatures, when we step out of moral goodness, we actually become less of a thing. And this is Vervaeke's reciprocal narrowing. That's what he's saying.
Yep.
He's saying that when you cease to be the less morally good you are, the less ontology you have. You become something less.
Yeah.
How do you get out of that? You get out of that by freedom, not freedom for, what is it? Freedom of choice and freedom from consequence. That's not freedom. Freedom is the ability to be good, which is to say, more for humans, morally and ontologically to be perfected, which is to be completed, to be whole.
Or to be better. And I think that's...
Or to be better.
Well, yeah, I mean, we set this bar of wholeness. It's like, just be better, okay? Let's just. Well, it's one of the brilliant things that Peterson does. Is he says, just compare yourself to who you were yesterday, man. Don't shoot for perfection. Just like try to be better do one small thing better today than you did yesterday. Good enough.
Well, I think Aristotle was probably onto something with his four causes. And if you're thinking in those terms, right, the efficient cause and the final cause of your goodness, very different, right? If you're like, I'm going to try to operate in my final cause, it doesn't allow you to do anything.
Right.
So your efficient cause would be is basically Peterson talking about that. Like, how do I move towards my final cause? It's that. It's like compare myself to yesterday, do something a little bit better than I did before. The problem where Peterson falls apart is that there's no final cause to goodness in Peterson's universe. I mean, this has been turned over. This is not something new.
He's still a sciencey guy. He's still a materialist.
Well, and it's sort of the classical liberalism thing, which I watched the trailer for ARC or something, and it's basically like, we're proposing human flourishing, and I'm like, great, until we can like come down and get some granularity on what human flourishing means. We're gonna do the same thing because
romanticism. That's romanticism.
Well, it's interesting that you have historically classical liberalism moved into the Romantic era pretty much immediately, and it's like that's the process. You just do one to the other. Hey, Jacob, I've been talking a bunch, and you've been on here, and I haven't seen you on the screen in a while. So,
you were talking about me. What did you say about me?
No. I was talking, and you were here.
Oh,
I mean, here in air quotes, but you were there. I don't know if you had anything you wanted to say.
Good is good. I'm a fan of good. I like good.
And God is good all the time.
All the time.
God is good.
All the time. Or to quote Father George Manley Hopkins, we must always be on the side of good, because good is good.
That's
simple
genius
as.
right there.
Like, oh, yeah, that's right. That's okay. That's how it works, actually.
That's too bad to hear that they went with human flourishing. Like, and it's wrong too. That's the worst. That's the worst thing you can possibly say. It's like, your purpose is to be happy. It's like, no, it so most certainly is not. Like, where are you getting this garbage from? That's just wrong.
Well, it's so interesting, Mark, because when you use the word happy, like I know exactly where you're coming from, and I was on that train for years. But then becoming Catholic, there's this other use of the word happy in like amongst Catholics. It means a completely different thing.
Yeah, eudaimonia.
Yeah, it means.
Yeah, but eudaimonia is contentedness. That's the problem.
Yeah,
eudaimonia is contentedness.
Well, the problem is that you just have English slipping around under us. I mean, that's honestly like the word when most people on the street say happy, they don't mean anything like when like a Catholic priest says like that we should hope for the happiness of heaven. Those things are not like the same word in English, and that happiness in English and happy used to mean lucky, right?
Right.
Call no man happy until he is
happy
dead.
Until he is dead. Right. Right, but the colloquial use is of something like when we'll say normies use it, right? When non-religious people use the term happy, what they're talking about would be either luck or joy. And either way, those are things that are rare and you should have gratitude for. And it's the same with human flourishing. It's just a different formulation of that. It's not flourishing. Like, flourishing is a gift that is given to you. Like, this is why people are confused about Job. It's like, no, you're not guaranteed to flourish, dude. You're guaranteed that you can become content in your worship. That's it. Like, you ain't got nothing else. You might be starving to death. The only thing you're guaranteed is that you can do things to make yourself content in worship. That's it. Everything else is extra.
Well, that's interesting. I was just blasting through the chat really quick before I got on. Were you guys talking about magic earlier?
Yes.
Usually.
Yeah, because usually, that happens a lot. Well, because we're all using magic, so
yeah.
Magic.
Good guess, Ted. We always talk about that. That's not a guess.
That's a certainty. But I mean, Mark, what you're saying essentially is that's the opposite of magic. The opposite of magic is to seek contentedness and worship of God. That's the opposite of magic. Like, pretty precisely. Because if you're Job, then stuff happens to you, and what you're doing is you're trying to get up all the way to God instead of saying, I'm going to try to regulate this other stuff. And what's interesting is, like, when I think about, I mean, God is merciful to us, and he also like does stuff for us and lets us do things, because it's really hard. Like, being Job is extraordinarily hard. But like the two models, you know, I see in, you know, like in the accounts of, in the gospel accounts, that you have at the beginning and the end. At the beginning you have the Annunciation, and the Blessed Virgin Mary says, be it done unto me according to thy will, right? She says that to God. So like, be it done, right? And then at the end, almost the end, you have the Passion and Christ in the garden, and he says, not my will, but yours. And so, I mean, it's that is where all prayer should lead. And what's interesting is that the person who can actually pray that is completely free, because what circumstances could possibly present themselves to you in which that's not open to you? That orientation, it's always available, because there is no circumstance, right? And this is my thing when in Chino, when Dr. Vervaeke was saying, you know, what's the orientation that you can take, the sort of meta optimal orientation?
Yeah.
When you have basically like a horizon, an event horizon. I'm sorry if one of my children is having a late night snack of bananas, and she's blowing raspberries. So I don't know if that's coming through, but it's very loud for me.
It's not.
But this unknown horizon, it's like, okay, you can't anticipate what's on the other side of that, and yet you still have to like orient yourself somehow. And my response was, well, it's the crucifixion, right? You're oriented and also radically open at the same time, and it's the prayer in the garden. It's like, there's nothing that could come after that prayer doesn't work for, because what's presented there is that the worst thing happens. I mean, this is right. Just on a narrative level, like Job in the Old Testament, and then Christ's Passion in the New Testament, they're both presented as limit stories. Like, that's what they're doing. They're saying, like, look, we're going to put some brackets on possible human experience. Like, I defy you to get outside of them. And so then, if the things that work in these here, if those things work here, if those are actually like ways to be connected to God in those circumstances, you can be assured that everything inside that, like, you'll be good. If you can get there, if you can get where he was in the garden, then it just doesn't matter. And then you're in the place of total freedom. And there you go. And I think Job, you could see the same thing. Job's more complicated. Like, I don't think that's what the focus of Job is about, but that's, I think you see the same thing going on there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think this actually ties in pretty well. I'm using Wikipedia because that's what's available. Talking about eudaimonia in Aristotle. It's the aim of practical philosophy prudence, along with the terms virtue and phronesis, commonly translated prudence.
Prudence, yeah.
Talking about how these things are essential core components to having this good spirit, which we're not able to translate into English well, because I don't like either happiness or welfare. I think we might have to use two words to translate this one Greek word here, good spirit. Having a spirit that's oriented towards the good and is capable of actually achieving the good.
Right.
But that right there is eudaimonia.
Right, but Aristotle's coming from the Stoic and Epicurean.
He founded those schools. He's not coming from them.
Right. But what do they have in common? Interestingly, contentedness. Right. That's their baseline. Like it's explicit. I know in recent times we mistake Epicureanism for this love of great food or something, but actually the Epicureans were basically
very different.
No, man, you're supposed to give up one ration of beans to feed your friend if it means you both starve a little. Like that. The Epicureans are we would consider them Stoics, but actually it's sort of like the foundation of Stoicism in some sense. This privation, right? And they talk about deprivation leads to when you get good food, you can really enjoy it. They talk about that, right? But ultimately, and the Stoics have the same attitude, this baseline of contentedness. And that's where they're coming from. That's the thing that leads you to, we'll say, be able to be a good person.
Interesting point of trivia. The Aramaic word for heretic is Epicurus.
So would that be
That's
like from the
interesting.
time of the Maccabees and the Greeks setting up the gymnasium in Jerusalem and all of that?
I mean, it's the Aramaic loan word that's used in the Mishnah, which is at the latest 200, like 2nd century, for heretic. So it must have been at least 100
to do with
200 years old.
Starting to eat pork, go to the gymnasium, and covering over the mark of your circumcision, right?
Those are 3 things which people did. Yes.
So,
Mark has
And
several
worshiping
questions.
false gods. I left the most important. I buried the lead there. I'm sorry.
So I grabbed a quick Britannica. The conventional English translation of the Greek term happiness is unfortunate because eudaimonia, as Aristotle and most other ancient philosophers understood it, does not consist of a state of mind of or a feeling of pleasure or contentment, as happiness as often implies, right? And it is the implication. So
Interesting.
And so that's where Bishop Barrett and Dr. Peterson just started not communicating, if you remember that. I'm like, oh, come on, Your Excellency, please remember that he didn't get the first books of the Nicomachean Ethics drilled into him when he was 19.
right. Well, and
Like
the
you and I
problem for
did.
science is that they're trying to have and contain a bunch of things without acknowledging that you can't have or contain the more even pieces of them, right? Because again, we don't have that poetic sense of the world where representations are representations of something higher when they're properly ordered. And it's the properly ordered part that's tricky, granted, but that's the difference between an idol and an icon.
For Christians,
You know,
Jacob.
Mark, you should come to this thing that we're having in November in Arkansas about poetry. I know, we love that.
I will do my best.
Awesome. Okay, no, I want to look, Mark, because your notion of contentedness is really interesting because it actually hits on something that bounces around in the Peterson sphere / the thing that won't be named here, which is there's like guys like Father Eric or Jacob, and then there's like the process theology guys like Dr. Ian McGillicrest and the other guys who like Whitehead. And I think actually the English word contentedness is like really close to the heart of what's going on here, because I think the process theology guys have this notion that contentedness / is like something like stasis and death and like not living and not dynamic, and which is very weird. And this is why they kick up this about, you know, their heels about all this notion about like God being perfect or the beatific vision being full fulfillment. Contentedness, I think what you're talking about when you talk about contentedness is not, it's not the, like, say, like the you're not like taking the volume down on who you are as a being or what you are until it matches circumstances. It is, it's actually the opposite. It's total it's like, it is that state whereby everything that like calls out in you is being met, right? Like that should be contentedness. Because Mark, you don't like, you don't think, well, you need to just like try to not appreciate food so that you're just content with whatever garbage you eat. Like that's not contentedness, right? Like the point is you need to have some orientation, some relationship to your food that actually transforms it by, say, for instance, seeing it be the division of your divine Father, the provision of your divine Father who cares for you. And then all of a sudden you're like, whatever food it can be, it could be an amazing gourmet feast, or it could be dry beans that whoever some homeless guy shares with you. And it's
Well,
like,
maybe, yeah, but
that's where contentedness comes from, because it comes from, well, to go back, it's good on a higher level. That's what it is, basically, is you're moving up levels in terms of how something is good for you.
well, I would say, how about this? How about contentedness is contingent upon the things around you, right? Your conditions in the moment. But what you're doing are two things, and you only have to do two things. One is fill that condition with all of your being, right? However little that may be, right? So
Okay.
yeah, maybe, and also orient your being towards upwards, towards the highest, right? And then if you do those two things, you are content, irrespective of your circumstances, right? But what that looks like has to change with circumstances.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, because we exist in relation, and so like we're contextual. Like, I don't know how to put it. Like, we're just contextual. Everything about us is contextual, and
Right.
so I mean, this is the whole thing about wisdom. To go back to wisdom, right, and about eudaimonia being the instantiation of practical wisdom in life. I was like, Mark, what's the wisest thing for me to do? And you can answer me at an extraordinarily high level, which would be to pursue wisdom and the
Right.
good. And it's like, okay, great. Okay, so now, like, what do I do that's the most wise thing? It's like, what's going on? Like, what is your, it's like, and on and on and on. And it's like, this is why you can't make rules for wisdom. You just can't. Like, you have to
Right.
become a wise person. And
Exactly.
wise people, how do you know a wise person? Because they're people who know what's wise, not because they.
Well, you see,
No, they might because it's.
You see the wisdom, like you see the wisdom in their actions, or you see the wisdom in their advice, or whatever, right? You sense the wisdom at a different level.
Isn't it wild that you can recognize someone as being more wise than you? Like, that's marvelous.
It's pretty necessary, though.
It's totally necessary, but it's like, when someone like does math, that's just like totally. Someone starts talking about linear algebra, I'm out. Like, I have no idea there's like this inaccessibility. When someone does something really wise, you're like, oh, I have no idea how you got there. But like, I, as a fool, recognize that was wise, and it's just so interesting to me. I think about this all the time, like the notion of like, how does a broken mind be healed? Like, how does it participate in its own healing? But we can. I don't know. It's just it's wonderful.
Right.
Like, it's really wonderful that we as.
But you don't want to
recognize
universalize that. Here's an example, right? Because some people can't see wisdom, like they don't see wise people at all. So that would be a universalization, Father Eric, to our earlier, what is universalization, right? A lot of people get into this habit of, well, I can recognize wise people, therefore everybody else can. And it's like, oh, I don't know about that. I can recognize truth, therefore everybody else can. Oh, that's certainly not, that's not the case. But I can recognize beauty, right? I mean, those are universalizations because we don't recognize them equally, we'll say. We don't have equal capacity or equal ability or equal implementation. Something's not equal, and it's that equalization that I was using or referring to when I was saying universality. That's at that level. That's too low a level to be universal.
Right. Yeah. And, sometimes there's just no teaching people, right?
Right. Well, you can't. Right.
That's why the saving any of us is a work of the Holy Spirit. It's not anything that we can accomplish on our own merit, or even the merits of somebody else, unless it's the perfect man come down from heaven. But we won't talk about that in front of Jacob.
Do you think that you could even go further and say that you can't teach anyone unless they want to be taught?
Well, no,
I don't think teaching's a real thing anyway. I think you can guide somebody, and if they get revealed knowledge, that's fantastic. You can set up the conditions for that to happen, but really, I'm not even you can learn. I'm like, I don't know about that. I don't know if you can learn. Like, it's because it's not up to merely your will, which is not to say that your will is not involved, but it's not up to merely your will.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I will.
Laura,
Oh, it's gone too.
sorry. I don't know if I bumped that one out of your head. Sorry.
Blame me.
Oh yeah, it's about humility. For Pete's sake.
Of course it is. Right.
If you don't have
Yeah.
humility to start off with, then you're contented entirely with what's between your ears. You don't need
that's
anything
not,
more than
but
that.
that's not sufficient either. I mean, I've met people who are ready and willing to learn as much as they can be, and not just me, but like they cannot be taught a certain thing. And it's like, I don't know what that is. I don't understand it. I don't want to understand it. Like, I have no desire to understand it, but it is what it is. Like, that's the thing. And whoa, that's a decent question from Benjamin Franklin. How rare.
How soon do you give up teaching? If the children rebel, do you stop teaching? Well, look, when I say that, when I made that comment about can you teach anyone? Or no, sorry, I didn't say that. I said I don't think you can make anyone learn. That's what I meant. So like, yeah, because at the end of the day, I mean, like, good old aphorisms: you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. It's like, it's actually impossible to make someone care about what you're doing or about what you're saying. Like, it's actually impossible to make them care. And so if they do, or if they have another set of things that are driving them, sometimes you can say, hey, look, here's how the thing that I'm saying is important relates to the thing that you think is important, right? Generally, when we talk about like convincing someone or something, that's actually what we mean, I think, probably. I haven't really put a ton of thought into this, but it's something like drawing the line from, here are the things that you find valuable, and here's why I think you should find this valuable or important or whatever. But Mark, to your point, like there's all sorts of levels to this too, right? It's not just, well, I just want to learn. It's like, great, I'm glad that you want to learn. Do you know what you should be learning? Right? Because that's a whole, I mean, this is where it gets weird. It's like, it's not just, do you want to learn? Do you know what you should learn? Because what could you learn? I mean, this is the Pageau, Vervaeke, and Peterson, like, brilliant thing about combinatorial explosion and attention. Like, they're all making the same point with slightly different language, and it's, you could pay attention to an infinite number of things. What are you going to pay attention to? And it's like, I'm ready to learn. It's like, great. So I went to like a math and science boarding school, and people, like, the people going there went there, like, they have, like, nerd was their identity. And if you really want to parse the notion of nerd apart, I think it's essentially, it's people who are unable to provide proportion to factual knowledge. That's what a nerd is. A nerd is someone who has a hard time saying there's a difference between, let's say, how important this piece of information about, like, a mayfly life cycle is, and the wisdom that I use to relate to my wife. Those are like, there's different values there. Now, there's another set of people, like, say, Dr. Jordan Peterson, who could do this thing where they take something that seems really unimportant and actually make you see why it is. That's a whole nother thing. But the notion of nerd as such is something like, here's my enormous litany of whatever obscure, it's all true, right? It's always true, but it's like, is it important?
Yeah. Well, so, and I did want to address what Laura's talking about too, right? Like, which is, there's different ways of introducing learning. And I think this is where the humility and also the caring comes in that you were mentioning, Ted. Like, you don't have the humility to learn the thing you need to learn in the way you need to learn it, and the thing you need to learn about the subject you care about might not be the thing you think you want to learn. And so, because you run into this a lot when so I've done a lot of training. A lot of people have wanted me to mentor them in programming for various reasons, or systems engineering, or sometimes both. My success rate is extremely low with a certain class of people. And lots of people have learned from me. Like, I'm very good at training, corporate training. I'm very good at corporate training, very good at teaching people one-on-one. It's not a problem for me. But there have been many people who've come to me super eager, and we would say, although this is slightly incorrect, it's correct enough, they don't want to put in the work, right? So yeah, there's an aspect to learning piano where if you're not going to sit down for 20 minutes a day at least and play piano, you're going to be limited in what you can learn about piano, no matter how much you care about piano. Because I've met people actually like that with the piano. In fact, I'm like that with all musical instruments. I'm just never, well, I know I'm never going to put in the time. I already know. I've been trying my whole life. It just never happens that I will put in the time. I cannot get in the regimented. Now, martial arts, no problem at all. Put in the time. You did the 10-point blocking system every day for years. Like, no problem. Music, drawing, nah. I don't know why. I have a super, I really actually want to do both those things, and I've just never been able to do it, right? Sitting down, writing poetry, that was something I was highly successful at. I could probably jump right back into that. I've got poetry that I've written somewhere in the shed. And so that's not a problem. But some of these other things are a big problem. And some of that is probably just what you're willing to sacrifice for what you want to learn, or or learning the thing in the way you have to personally. And like, because a lot of people like, oh, I want to learn how to program a video game in assembly language. And I'm like, no, you really don't. And some people I can tell, no, they really do. And they will be able to put in the work, because programming anything in assembly language is a nightmare.
I mean, that's one step above ones and zeros, right?
Yes, assembly language. That is exactly correct.
Mark,
one step
the kinds
above.
of people who want to program, the kinds of people who want to program a video game in an assembly language are the kinds of people that create analog calculators in Minecraft.
Yes. Right. No, there's a class of people. Well, that's the thing. Like, I can recognize those people. Like I recognize color in the daytime. Like, I can just see, not really, but I can tell by talking to somebody whether or not they fit into the camp of the type of person. But the number of people that think they want to do that, and I know absolutely will never be able to, is way larger than the number of people that are interested and can do it. And there's a bunch of people who could do it but aren't interested. Like, that happens too. And we don't appreciate all that nuance in learning and education. And this is what leads to the education is bad because it tries to fit everybody into one box. What we really should do is have a 4-pronged education part, or a 6-pronged, or whatever it is. It's like, that's impractical. Like, that's just a dumb idea. The fact of the matter is we have to try to fit them in boxes, not because we want to train them for the factory because of the Prussians. Like, that's a stupid explanation. It's totally historically wrong, completely inaccurate, and utter garbage. It's because there's a practical limitation to what you can do with the number of students versus the number of teachers versus the amount of infrastructure. It's just a simple freaking trade-off. And you can make the very good argument that we never should have federalized education in the United States, but I'm not going to get on that soapbox.
Yeah, somebody else's turn for the soapbox.
Jacob, did you have a soapbox you wanted to get on?
No, he's got his own channel. He can soapbox there.
Yeah, he just wants to hang out with his cats.
Learning is hard, man. Learning is multi-factor and really difficult, and involves humility and being willing to accept what you can and give up on your conception of what it is you think you can learn or want to learn, and all kinds of things. It's hard.
Well, I do want to go back to this thing that Benjamin Franklin said, which it's just shocking to me that Benjamin Franklin cares about Father Eric's live stream. Like, you would think that Benjamin Franklin would have like all sorts of other things to be paying attention to. Famous guy, helped start a country, all that. But like, he's hanging out here with us, which is pretty cool. But how soon do you give up teaching? If the child rebels, do you stop teaching? When I say that wisdom, you can't turn wisdom into rules, this is exactly what I mean.
Right.
Like, they're just like, there isn't an answer to this question. It's like, how soon do you give up teaching? Well, you give up teaching if it's right to give up teaching. It's like,
what are you teaching?
Change what you're doing. I mean, that was Laura's excellent point. Like, sometimes you just got to force the kid to practice 20 minutes every day on the piano. That's a different way of teaching than there's other ways to teach piano.
You cannot teach someone something they don't want to learn. That includes kids. But kids are stupid. And as any good parent knows, it's really easy to fool a kid, right? Like, there are parents who say to their kids, you must wear this. And then there are parents who say, which one of these two would you like to wear? And the parents who say the second one are a lot more successful, as opposed to the ones who are like, you must wear this. And so I'm sorry, you're not a good teacher if your kid wants to run away from teaching. Now, practice is a whole other thing. And whether or not a kid will practice, will spend time doing things that they actually like, there are ways of incentivizing kids. But if your teaching isn't geared towards the kid that you are teaching, you're going to fail. And there are good ways and bad ways of teaching. And a bad way of teaching is like, you must learn this.
There's something interesting there in terms of, well, because, I mean, Jacob, what you're saying is there's this connection between knowing someone and being able to teach them, which is really interesting. I mean, look, like, because teaching and mutual learning are actually really similar. Like, first off, right? I mean, anyone who's been in a teaching situation, you'll immediately realize that the first thing that happens when you start teaching people is you find out how ignorant you are about it and you learn a whole bunch of new stuff, right? So, okay, so teaching and mutual learning, very, very similar. And so then I'm thinking about a couple of things. One, I'm thinking about like me and Mark's relationship over these online discussions, where it's like, when I first started talking to Mark, I had no idea what he was saying. And I got nothing.
I still have no idea what he's saying. That's why I don't listen.
But because like I know Mark a lot better now, to some degree, at least I know how he talks about things now, he thinks about things, some things, I'm actually able to teach in the sense of communicate what it is that I think is true in that situation to Mark. Okay. Because I know him, because I'm like, these are the things that Mark will connect with, right? Because like, that's what I was trying to get at when I say, I can't make like my child value this thing, but if I know that they value something else and I can make them see how those two things are connected in value, then I can start to get them on board. And so if I know, hey, Mark thinks these things are important, these are really like core concepts, and I'm trying to sell Mark on something. If I can show him how it's connected to like some particular thing he's trying to unravel, or how it enlightens something that he finds important, then all of a sudden it's relevant to him and he wants to hear what I have to say. And I think that that's true with teaching, period. Like you're saying, Jacob, I mean, the notion of saying, your notion of you have to do this versus like, here's a choice. I think the broader thing is you have to do this. Although I do think there's a place for helping your children simply just develop personal discipline. I don't think that, at any rate, this is what I think. That is not, it shouldn't all just be like, you just always get to choose about everything. It's like, sometimes like you're going to give up your personal idiosyncrasies to come and be part of the dinner table, as Jonathan Pageau would put it, right? And like, they just have to do that. They don't get to choose if they want to eat later. But there's all sorts of things that you can do to show them like, hey, learning how to eat at the table with everyone else is a really good thing to do. And so there's something in there about like, the more that I know my child, the more I'm capable of doing it. Like, it's so much easier to get my children to do what they're supposed to do than me to get someone else's kids to do what they're supposed to do, because I know them. And I think, I mean, when you start realizing that, I think that has a ton of stuff per that earlier point about like what Mark was getting at about truth and goodness and what God does for us. Because with the notion of God knowing us, all of a sudden this becomes really transformative, and you realize, oh, if I, as a parent of my children, am able to use my knowledge of them to draw them towards what's good in ways that they don't understand what's going on, what is God doing to me in all the circumstances of my life?
There's something,
Yeah.
I don't know, there's something really great and beautiful about how you have to be transformed, at least a little bit, to actually get to know somebody well. Right? You've got to kind of cultivate the space inside of you to be able to say, this is what this person's like. This is what they're into. to come forward with that spirit of finesse towards them, and then that actually being what you can use to draw something good out of them or to share something good that you found. That very personal relationship versus even what's available from a book. And I have lots of books, and I don't think books are bad, but yeah, that's very different than actually being able to talk to somebody.
You have to
I
make
think
a space in yourself, right?
Yeah.
For them, right? For your, or at least your model of them. And that changes you because you're changing the space within your head, we'll say. And then that allows you to connect to them, hopefully using the poetic way of knowing. And then that allows you to draw them into your world as well.
And that's actually kind of says that one of the effects of love, even on the human level, is mutual indwelling,
mm,
where the lover and the
that's
beloved are in each other.
that is what the entire Divine Comedy is about too. If you're wondering, it is the
Check
it is
that off the
the
bingo card.
yeah.
The Divine Comedy came up.
It always does. It always does. But yeah, that's what the Divine Comedy is about. Because look, Dante's notion is what Father Eric said there, that it's the indwelling of the other, that can happen between God and man. That's his central thesis. And that the approach to that is through loving people. Right? So Beatrice, what goes on in his relationship with Beatrice, is what teaches Dante that could happen with God himself and him. And and so the closer you get to God as you move out of hell into paradise, the more, look, the anti-picture of that, right? The anti-picture of the beloved dwelling in the other is what you get at the very pit of hell when everything is frozen over and you have a soul who is eternally chewing the head of another soul, of a man that he hated in life. Like, he's eating his head forever. It's like, that's the opposite of love. It's just like, I'm going to try to destroy you by consuming you, instead of this thing in which, like, versus the other image, which is the souls in paradise, where they're all mirrors of divine charity and goodness. And so that every new soul that's in heaven, there's that much more of the glory and the love reflected around.
And they're singing.
Yes.
I still have zero clue how Dante became like a prophetic text. It's like a lot of people use it as like, oh, the mystical explanation of what heaven and hell are like by some random guy.
Wow. I've never heard anybody use it that way.
Wait, Jacob, are you saying
No,
you
they don't
understand
call
how
it. What?
Sorry. Are you saying that you don't understand how the text, the Divine Comedy, became used that way? Or are you saying I don't get how Dante Alighieri, the historical man, managed to produce a text like the one that he did?
I don't understand how people view a text by the historical man Dante Alighieri as a prophetic text the way they do.
Oh. Well, I mean, he was a genius. Like, why he was a genius is a completely unanswerable question. But like,
No. I understand that there are okay, let's talk about the Matrix, right? So the Coen brothers are geniuses, right? And it was a pretty influential movie that lots of people talk about. But I separate their conceptions from, like, I'm like, this was made by the Coen brothers. These are not great fonts of wisdom. Therefore, I will not treat the details of their compositions the same way as I would, for example, scripture. Wachowski's, whatever.
Oh, I mean, I think the Coen brothers, look, Oh Brother Where Art Thou, that's a good movie. No, look, So here's what's interesting, Jacob, about that is that the Wachowskis, from what I can tell, they did the Matrix movies, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
They're
Speed
just-
Racer.
Oh my goodness, that's so true. They're just speaking out of themselves, right? Like they got some ideas from somewhere. What Dante did was he didn't create some view of the universe that's like great and prophetic and amazing. What he did was, as far as I can tell, he was the whoa, that was exciting. He was the artistic means by which the view of the universe in the Christian West was presented in a poem. Right? So it's not like he came up with this stuff. His genius is not in like creating it. His genius is in arranging stuff that he'd already been given, which to me is a very different kind of genius. And that's why I think I could because what he does is he says, hey, you need to look at these things this way, right? He's not coming up with heaven or purgatory or hell or the beatitude of the saints or any of these things. He didn't even make up any of his characters. All of his characters are either mythological, historical, or contemporary or biblical. And sure, whatever, blur those categories around as much as you want. He didn't make up anyone in the Divine Comedy, right? So he didn't like generate something ex nihilo. Whatever genius it was is the fact that he came up with this beautifully symmetric structure that he could take basically the entire Christian West view of the universe, cosmology at that point, and put it all together in a way where it just lights up like a literary stained glass window. And you look at it and you're like, oh my goodness, wow, that's something I'd never seen before. So there's my, I don't know, there's my
Have you ever
apology
read
for.
Okay, well, here you are complaining about books you haven't read.
Yep.
First of all, I find poetry in translation just inherently offensive.
Oh boy, that explains a lot, actually.
It does. Yep.
Yeah, poetry, like reading poetry in translation is just something I generally try to avoid ever doing.
Wow, Jacob, that's so interesting. The poetry works on a lot of different levels. I don't know how to say it.
I mean,
Then learn
frankly,
learn
I would be
Italian.
more likely to pick it up and try to read the Italian because I do know Spanish than I would be to pick an English copy of something that's poetic.
So read it, and then you'll understand why people have although I've never heard that particular attitude that you described, but understand why people have such reverence for his writing.
Well, it's interesting. I think there's actually a really good set of examples that I could use because I'm thinking of like two different, like being in like a Gothic cathedral, and then being in a Romanesque cathedral, and like when you read Dante in the Italian, there's all of this textural stuff that's going on there that you lose when you translate it to English. But with like Romanesque architecture, you're not looking at all the fine detail and the fractal surfaces. You're looking at the proportions of it and the arches and all these things. And I think that you're right that you lose stuff when you go from the Italian to English, but to think that you've lost the most important things that Dante has to say is like so far off base. Because it's not like Gerard Manley Hopkins. Gerard Manley Hopkins, reading a translation of Hopkins would just be pointless because he's saying so much in the sound of it. But when there's actually a difference between lyrical poetry and epic poetry, where epic poetry is not okay, this is a great example. See, I'm pulling this from C.S. Lewis's Preface to Paradise Lost. He says, go to a used bookstore and find a copy of the Aeneid or the Iliad or the Odyssey. And what you'll find is, or even something in English like Idylls of the King by Alfred Lord Tennyson, these big, long narrative poems. And someone will have opened it up and they've got like underlined stuff and they put stuff in quotes and they've made all these notes. And you get about 6 pages in and there's nothing else in the book. And his point is that the Aeneid, the Iliad, the Odyssey, Job, they're not about producing pithy quotes. you're like, oh man, he said that so well, and like the way that he formed that Latin hexameter right there was just like, like that's not what the poetry is doing. Now, like lyrical poetry, say Shakespeare's sonnets or something like that, yeah, it lives by that. And so when you translate it, you're losing a whole bunch of stuff. But with specifically the form of epic poetry, Beowulf is another great example of this. You actually, like, the kind of poetry allows itself to be translated with only minimal loss. And I say that with friends who, Jacob, have the same view as you, who are Catholic, and they will read Milton's Paradise Lost before they'll read the Divine Comedy because it's in English. And so, but like it's really what's going on there. You're not supposed to like sit with some particular phrase of Dante's and like, wow, because there's just too much of it to do that with. You just have to keep running.
Okay, but there's enough poetry in languages I know that I haven't read that I could be reading. Plus, like, I don't view Dante as in any way, like, I'm reading right now an English translation of, which I got at a Benedictine monastery, by the way, of of Rabbi Chaim Vital's mystical diary, right? And like, I kind of wonder to myself, okay, I could be trying to read this in Hebrew and understanding probably not as much because the Hebrew and Aramaic he wrote it in is just too hard for me, right? But like, at least I view his spiritual journeys like he was Rabbi Chaim Vital. So when he wrote something, I'm like, this is somebody that I believe like was receiving revelation. To read Dante in translation to English, it's like everything that I would find, like the poetry, like everything is just being denuded of it. Like,
Jacob,
not everything.
I wish I could shake your hand and thank you, because my whole point about learning has just been proven perfectly. I can't teach you.
Okay, Jacob, let me see if I can do it, right? I want you to imagine that you're a Marvel fanboy, right? And you've been watching all of the Marvel movies coming up, right? You've got your Captain America, you've got your Iron Man, you've got your Thor, you've got your Black Widow, you got your Spider-Man, and then all of a sudden they all come together into the same movie. And it's like, oh, what do they do when they all get together, right? A little bit of that energy, refined, brought up to a much more interesting and satisfying palette, is present in a epic poem like the Divine Comedy, because as far as I can tell, Dante integrated everything that he knew into that.
It's like the
so he's a
ultimate crossover
synthesizer.
poem.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Yeah, that's exactly it.
Isn't that where all the value is, in ordering?
I mean, there's definitely value in ordering things. Yeah.
Okay, look, Jacob. When I said genius, this is actually really cool. So genius, in say going back to St. Thomas Aquinas' time, the notion of genius was seen as how good of a memory someone had. So how much had they read and how much had they remembered of what they read. This is totally opposed to the romantic notion of genius of someone who can come up with crazy stuff out of wherever and like is really original or creative. Totally different thing from. So when I say genius, when I say Dante was a genius, I mean like Dante was a genius in the sense of he was an incredible synthesizer and integrator. I don't think Dante was trying to be original. I think he was trying to speak what was true, and he was incredibly well read and incredibly intelligent, obviously. And you also have to ask, what is poetry? And if for most of those answers of what poetry is, if you say Dante was a truly great poet, then you actually do just have to take him seriously. Like that's what poetry means. So
Learn more in Arkansas at the Convivium.
Yeah.
Links in the
Where I
description. And don't
promise.
forget to hit that like button and subscribe.
like and subscribe. Oh my goodness. Yeah, there will be more Divine Comedy. I probably can't keep it out. So
T.S.
the world.
Eliot,
What did T.S. Eliot? Yes, there we go.
the Grail translation of
Eliot.
the Psalms.
Ted,
Uh-huh.
have you talked to Charlie Hancock?
No, we haven't crossed paths yet.
Oh, you got to talk to Charlie.
I'd like to talk to Charlie. Yeah. Last time I talked with Sherry and Nate, she was talking about Charlie Hancock and how great he is. So
He's the only reason I've ever been to Arkansas.
wait, is Charlie Hancock in Arkansas?
Yep.
Oh my goodness, I need to meet Charlie. All right, I'm gonna
He
try to dig him
lives
up on
near
Discord or
Lake
something.
Beaver or Beaver Lake or whatever you call it.
Yeah. I mean, that's my quadrant of the state. So Beaver Lake is beautiful.
That's where we had the first annual Bridges of Meaning fishing trip.
Did anybody actually fish?
Nobody actually fished, no.
Wow.
I just sat around a campfire all night and talked.
We did until 6
That is-
a.m. until dawn.
Come on, we'll do it again. We got campfires. We're gonna have fall weather. It's gonna be awesome.
Hey, I drove all the way to Arkansas from Los Angeles.
Come on. Jacob, that is remarkable. That's a drive.
Heroic pilgrimage, worthy of the best of us.
Man.
Arkansas was beautiful.
Gentlemen, Arkansas is beautiful. No one knows about how beautiful Arkansas is. Yeah, so I posted. This is just the one funny thing. I posted in the like meetings thing in the Bridge of Meeting Discord. I dropped the link for the sign up, and there's a picture from a mountain in the Arkansas River Valley that's like an hour from here. And I can't remember who it was. But someone goes, "That's such a beautiful picture. Is that in Appalachia somewhere?" I was like, "No, it's Arkansas. It's where we're having the meeting." Like, I didn't just pick up like random picture of a mountain. It's like exactly where it is.
I was genuinely very much surprised at the beauty of Arkansas, and I've driven through most of the United States now. It is definitely. I mean, I did not expect. So it was in July. It was 4th of July weekend. I did not expect it to be as luscious and green as it was in the middle of the summer.
Oh yeah, we love Arkansas. It's got to get really dry before it dries out, before it turns brown here. Arkansas is a gem. I was up in just this last weekend. This is cool. This weekend we were up in a little back corner of the Ozarks where my grandfather's grandfather's father ran the general store. And the little house behind this town of like 10 houses, someone renovated and turned into a short-term rental. We spent the night there, right behind this general store that however many generations back my ancestor ran. And it's just painful how beautiful it is, honestly. All these rounded, it's like, it really does look like Appalachia on like half scale, actually. Just rounded sandstone mountains, just covered in oak trees, and all these old black walnuts in people's yards that have all turned yellow, and like the sumac and tupelo is all red. And then we got the first cold front of the year through, like 41 out, and just brilliant blue sky. The shadows all turn blue in the fall. It's good. It's good stuff.
Very nice. Very nice.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what's also good. It's going to bed and sleep. And so, thanks for coming on. Had another great time. Great to have you on, Jacob. Hope to see many of you in Arkansas. November, let me pull up the calendar again. November 17th and 18th. The sign up is in the video description. But otherwise, God bless you all. Happy Sunday.